The alarms hit at 2:14 a.m. like they always did, only this time they didn't stop. 4 servers, then 8. The firewall threw up 3 separate flags, all screaming external transfer anomaly, but no one was listening. No one except me in my flannel robe with half a cold Diet Dr. Pepper and a cat that wouldn't stop kneading my lap. I stared at the terminal screen and muttered, "Someone's shopping in our database like it's a Black Friday clearance rack." I wasn't supposed to be on call that night, officially. The new guy had the title. Fancy profile picture, lots of buzzwords. But when it all went to hell, they called me. They always did. I didn't ask why anymore. I just opened the console, pulled the plug on the outbound route, and isolated the compromised instance before the damage got irreversible. Then I logged the breach manually, updated the insurer through the back-end portal, and filed a secondary alert to Risk Ops. I signed it with my initials like always. LJ. Before I go on, quick thing, 97% of people listen to these stories without subscribing. If this one grabs you even a little, give it a like and hit that follow button. It really helps the team keep telling these wild stories, and trust me, this one only gets worse from here. Anyway, that was my rhythm. I didn't scream or grandstand, I responded. I patched holes, contained threats, reviewed logs, and rewrote procedures until my coffee went cold. At Novarisk, I was never the loudest, never the highest ranked. But I was the one who kept our name off the headlines and our CFO from losing sleep over a $15 ransomware clause. They never gave me the incident commander title, though. That went to Brian, the guy who thought endpoint hardening was an exfoliation process. He had the blazer, the hair gel, the Instagram where he posted photos of his desk setups like he was starring in a productivity documentary. But Brian didn't read logs. Brian didn't stay up at night rechecking audit trails from old threat actor simulations. Brian didn't update the internal insurance binder with our underwriter's clause addenda. I did. I was also the one who'd called the insurer when they rolled out the new cyber policy. It had language around something called a named incident responder. New term. I dug into it. Turns out the insurance wasn't just for the company. It was tied to a specific individual. Me. By name. Not role. I'd done the certifications, submitted the drill logs, even uploaded 2 tabletop run-throughs with timestamps and results. Our underwriter knew me, trusted me, and approved coverage because of me. So naturally, I never told anyone. You think they cared? Dalton, the new COO, wouldn't have read a clause if it smacked him across the face during his protein shake break. He treated cybersecurity like a Netflix password, something you borrowed, ignored, and reset when it became inconvenient. The alarms stopped by 4:06 a.m. I watched the logs stabilize. Isolated traffic resumed. The data exfil attempt had been partial. Non-PII, just vendor forms and some old platform metrics. Still enough to trigger a disclosure requirement. I followed protocol. Flagged it in the system. Left a note for Brian he'd never understand. I signed off, fed the cat, and went back to bed. The next morning, Dalton pulled me into his office, no warning. HR was already seated. "We're making some strategic shifts," he said, sliding a bland beige folder across the table. "You've done good work, but honestly, you're just IT. Anyone can respond to an incident. Just IT. The same mouth that mispronounced endpoint segmentation now told me I was redundant. Not critical, not unique, just IT. I stared at the folder. Severance, NDA, standard verbiage, the usual beige betrayal. "You've built a solid base," he continued. "Now it's time for people with vision to take it further." I signed. Quietly. No arguing, no door slamming. Just left the badge on his desk and walked out. Did he know what he'd done? Did he even read Clause 14b? Probably not. But I had. And that's when I realized the alarms weren't just digital. They were personal. And they were about to get loud. The revised cyber policy landed on my desk with a soft thump. All 63 pages of it. February always meant insurance season, renewals, clause reviews, fresh compliance checklists to pretend the exec team would read. I'd been handling Novarisk's cybersecurity liability policy solo for the past 5 years, mostly because no one else wanted to spend a Tuesday night deciphering policy language written by someone allergic to periods. But I didn't mind. Legalese was my second language. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept us covered. The thing about these policies is they never get lighter. This year's came with a glossy new cover page and enough bolded red boxes to make a crime scene jealous. I skimmed the executive summary. No big surprises, tightened breach timelines, stronger third-party app risk language, new mandates for ransomware scenario planning. And then I hit page 14, clause 14b. Coverage activation in the event of data breach, exfiltration, ransomware incident, or unauthorized system access requires response leadership by the named individual as recorded in the policy binder during the active coverage period. Role-based substitution not permitted unless formally submitted and approved in writing by policy underwriter. I reread it twice. There was no wiggle, no vague interpretation to hide behind. The underwriter wasn't asking for a job title. They were demanding a person, a name, and that name was mine. LJ, Lisa Jensen, Incident Response Lead listed on our coverage documentation by hand, under Qualified Handler, along with my certs, drill logs, and the 2-hour tabletop session I led with our internal team back in October. It wasn't an ego thing. I didn't puff up when I saw it. I just knew what it meant. So I flagged it. I brought it straight to Dalton, printed out with a sticky note on the page that mattered. I walked into his office while he was on a call about marketing metrics and waited, arms folded. When he finally clicked mute and looked up at me like I was the UPS guy dropping off toner, I explained it as simply as I could. This clause requires me, by name, to lead any response event if we want full coverage. It's not a role-based requirement. He squinted at the page, didn't even read the whole paragraph. Legal formality, he muttered, waving me off. Insurance always wants to feel special. Anyone in IT can respond. We're not running nuclear codes here. I stood there, blinking. I'm not saying anyone can't respond, I said, keeping my voice level. But if we want coverage, the insurer expects me to lead. That's how the policy is written. Dalton leaned back in his ergonomic chair, one of those mesh ones that look like a fishing net and cost more than my monthly rent. He did the things smug execs do when they want to look thoughtful, rubbed his chin with his thumb, and then grinned like he'd solved world peace. Lisa, we're moving into a modern ops structure. Flexible responsibilities, agile response teams. We don't hinge coverage on any one person. That's not scalable. I almost laughed. Not scalable. Like I was a spreadsheet column he could just reformat. Still, I didn't push it. I just nodded, quietly. But before I left his office, I said one thing. Make sure legal confirms that interpretation before you finalize. He didn't answer. I checked 2 days later. No notification had been sent to the insurer. The binder still listed me. The underwriter hadn't received any substitution request. No reassignment of the named individual, which meant clause 14b remained active, with me at the center. I documented everything, screenshotted the portal entries, archived the email where I'd sent the note to Dalton and CC'd risk. I even printed the page from the PDF and highlighted the clause in neon green, because I knew what would happen next. They always think they're untouchable until something breaks. And when it did, I wouldn't need to shout. I'd just need to show them the page they never read. Friday mornings always had a weird energy in that office, half the staff counting hours till happy hour, the other half pretending to be in back-to-back calls while doom-scrolling under the desk. I'd just finished validating a quarterly patch rollout when Dalton pinged me on Slack. Hey, can you drop by real quick? No calendar invite, no subject line, just that tone, chirpy and empty like a server pinging with no response. I walked into his office and immediately saw the setup. HR was already there. Her name was Marla. She had that preloaded empathy expression like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror that morning. A leather folder sat on the table with 2 pens, a paperclip, and a bottle of water. Always water, as if hydration could cushion humiliation. Dalton didn't even look up at first. He just adjusted his Bluetooth earbuds and finished whatever email he thought was more important than my time. Then he finally leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head, and smiled like a man who thought he was nailing the approachable boss look. Lisa, he said, like we were old friends reconnecting. Thanks for popping in. I'll be brief. You've been doing solid work, really. But with the budget realignment, we're trimming some of the more specialized roles. He gestured vaguely toward the air, like my entire career was a floating widget that didn't quite fit the new architecture of his spreadsheet empire. You're just IT, right? He added, as if the word just made it clearer. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I'd seen the writing on the wall since he'd started pushing vendor consolidation and slashing anything that couldn't be presented in a glossy deck to investors. Cybersecurity, incident response, risk containment, those weren't flashy. They were insurance policies in human form, and Dalton didn't believe in paying premiums. Marla slid the folder forward like a trained croupier at a Vegas table. Here's your exit package. Standard NDA, severance through end of quarter. We're happy to offer a letter of reference if needed. I didn't touch it. Dalton leaned forward now, arms on the desk, trying to sell this like it was some generous retirement gift. You've built great foundations, he said, but we're shifting to a more dynamic incident response model. Team-based, flexible, cross-functional. We'll take it from here. No need for your little response rituals anymore. Response rituals. Like prepping a rollback plan at 3 a.m. during the July vendor breach was a cute superstition. Like running containment drills and hardening endpoints and writing recovery timelines in real time was just my version of burning sage. I reached into my pocket, took out my badge, set it on the desk. He nodded. We'll be sure to collect your laptop and revoke credentials today. I nodded back. Make sure you check which access tokens are hardwired into your cloud backups. Some of them still route through my SSO chain. Wouldn't want any dangling credentials floating around. Dalton blinked, just for a second, then recovered with a smirk. We'll handle it. I walked out without shaking hands. Back at my desk, I gathered my things, my real things. The binder with the tabletop drill logs, the printed policy copy, the USB with my incident templates and audit notes, the little cactus from Risk that never grew. It all fit into one canvas tote with a fading DEF CON patch on the side. I paused before logging off. My email was still active, so I sent one message to myself. Subject line, termination, Feb 10. I attached screenshots of my Slack warnings about Clause 14b, the flagged policy language, and the time-stamped doc showing I was still the named responder. Then I sent a copy to my personal compliance archive. I didn't write a goodbye post, didn't make a fuss, just tapped out my credentials and left the terminal blinking on the login screen. Outside, it was raining. The sky gray enough to match the moment, but not dramatic enough to feel cinematic. I sat in my car, watching the wipers smear drizzle across the windshield, and let the silence settle. They thought I was just IT. But the thing about infrastructure, you don't notice it until it's gone. And when it breaks, you better pray the person who built it is still around. The first ping came in at 6:42 a.m. Monday. I was halfway through pouring coffee, still in my robe, the kind with the frayed sleeves and a security conference logo from 2016. The subject line on the email hit like a blunt object. Urgent. Policy activation inquiry, incident ref, MARDA 9032. It was from Novarisk's insurer, not Risk Ops, not legal, not Dalton, the insurer, which meant whatever happened, it was big enough that the policy was already under scrutiny. I set the mug down, opened the laptop, and read. Per active policy terms, confirmation is required. Did the named incident responder initiate breach protocol within the first 6 hours of threat window? No greeting, no preamble, just that. I stared at it. The breath caught in my throat because I already knew what this was. They'd had a breach, and no one called me. I opened a private portal to the insurance dashboard. My credentials still worked. Their system still showed me as the named responder, Lisa Jensen, valid through June 30th, role transition, blank. No amendments on file. No substitute handler form submitted. Nothing. Like I was still there, badge and all. I checked the breach timeline. The insurer's alert logs showed an external notification time of 5:18 a.m. Eastern, meaning the breach itself likely started well before that. And now they were on the clock. 6 hours. That's what the clause stated. 6 hours to notify, activate, and document steps with the named responder. Only they hadn't. And worse, they had no one else legally recognized. I checked my personal inbox. No messages, no call, no offboarding paperwork had included a role transition notice, no substitution of duty, no documented change on the binder I had last printed and stored in the CEO's office safe, still marked with a dated log of my tabletop exercises. They hadn't just fired me, they'd fired the only person contractually allowed to turn the damn coverage key. I closed the portal, opened the incident audit trail. No logs, nothing public yet, which meant they were trying to contain it internally. Probably Brian, fumbling around in the IR dashboard, Googling how to classify packet loss and praying no one asked why the backup validator wasn't triggering. I opened the insurer's message again and typed a reply. One line. No, I have not received any official role transition or deauthorization. Hit send. No exclamation points. No gloating, just confirmation. I didn't even need to say I'm no longer with the company, because for policy purposes, I was still very much part of it, on the one page they never bothered to revise. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number, New York area code. I answered. Ms. Jensen, this is Kara Langston with Echelon Cyber Risk. We're currently reviewing Novarisk's breach event, and we have a procedural concern. Her voice was professional, measured, but underneath, I could hear it. The edge of urgency. They knew this was about to become a thing. I understand you were terminated last Friday, she said carefully. Have you been contacted by anyone at Novarisk regarding formal transition of incident responsibilities? No, I said. I was not notified of any change. As far as the insurer is concerned, the only active certification and training record belongs to me. And unless you received signed authorization of a successor with equal credentials, Clause 14b is still binding. Silence. Then a soft exhale. That's what we have on file as well. Translation. They were screwed. I could already see the boardroom back at Novarisk, Dalton pacing, legal checking inboxes for that transition memo that was never sent. Brian probably trying to forward a Slack thread as proof of an internal handoff. And none of it would matter, because the insurer didn't care about Slack. They cared about the page in the binder. My name, my certs. The clause they all skipped because they assumed just IT meant disposable. The call ended politely. Kara thanked me for my clarity, said someone from their risk review team might follow up for a sworn statement, just in case the coverage entered dispute. I told her I'd be available. Then I sat back and stared at my quiet little home office, the one they thought I'd vanish into. And I waited. Because it was only Monday morning, and Novarisk hadn't even hit hour 7 yet. By noon, Dalton had already gone from shrugging it off to full panic mode, though I doubt he let it show in front of the board. He probably still had his "we've got this handled" voice on standby, that smooth, artificially calm cadence corporate execs practice in the mirror before an earnings call. But behind the scenes, they were scrambling. Hard. I got the first hint when a former colleague in Risk pinged me from her personal email. Subject line. Did they ever transfer the binder? No body text. Just that question. That one cursed, bureaucratic, career-ending question. I knew exactly which binder she meant. Black leather. Gold lettering. Onboarding year etched into the spine like a tombstone. It lived in the CEO's safe. Not metaphorically, but literally. I'd been the one who put it there, back when the company still believed incident response wasn't something you could farm out to a vendor with a pretty logo and a 3-day SLA. Inside that binder was everything the insurer ever needed to validate our policy. My certifications, printed copies of annual drills, training logs signed by department heads, timestamps of tabletop scenarios, breach simulation reports, all with wet signatures, physically notarized copies, even a backup USB drive clipped inside the back flap. It was the holy grail of our IR coverage, and no one had touched it since October. Not Dalton, not legal, not even the new CISO, who, to be fair, hadn't even lasted long enough to learn where the server closets were. That binder still listed me as the named incident responder, and the only way to change that, per policy, was to submit a formal reassignment. In writing, signed by both the outgoing and incoming responder, accompanied by equal or greater certification verification, plus a 30-day notice period, none of which had happened. At 12:47 p.m., Novarisk's insurer sent a formal reply, which was later leaked to me by someone who'd had enough of Dalton's "I've got it covered" act. Per clause 14B, we require written confirmation of incident responder status change, including validation of equal credentials and role assumption acknowledgement. We have no such documentation on file. As such, we consider the policy to remain under the previously named party. Previously named party. That would be me. And here's the part that really burned them. They couldn't even prove I was gone. Sure, HR had processed my termination, my badge was deactivated, but they never filed the role transition form. They never removed my name from the active binder. And they certainly didn't get the CEO's signature on a reassignment because, surprise, the CEO was on a month-long silent wellness retreat in Utah with no phone access and a strict no email policy, which meant the binder, still locked in the safe, still untouched, still binding. Dalton, in his infinite wisdom, had assumed digital forms and internal handoffs were enough. That naming someone else on a spreadsheet or forwarding a Slack thread with "Brian is on point for IR now" would cut it. It didn't. By 2:30, legal was in full damage control mode. They tried emailing the insurer a retroactive designation form for Brian. The insurer responded with a single sentence. Effective date of coverage adherence is bound to original designation timeline. Retroactive amendments are non-compliant. Translation: too late. You fired the key holder and forgot to tell the vault. By 3:09 p.m., they had someone physically go to the CEO's office to retrieve the binder. But guess what? Only 2 people had the safe code. The CEO and his assistant, who had just boarded a flight to Lisbon for her cousin's wedding. So the binder stayed locked, untouched, untampered, and worst of all, untimely. Every minute that passed, Novarisk's non-compliance window grew. And that meant every dollar of liability did too. I could imagine the scene. Dalton on speakerphone with legal, sweat starting to stain the armpits of his sleek, tailored dress shirt, asking if someone could just break open the safe. Someone probably replied that doing so would invalidate the timestamp integrity of the documents inside, which, in insurance language, might as well mean game over. Meanwhile, the insurer sat back, watched the clock, and waited, because policy isn't just what's written, it's what's filed. And for once, the only paper that mattered was the kind you couldn't backdate. Their biggest liability wasn't the breach itself. It was the woman they pushed out without checking which documents she signed last. Me. At exactly 4:13 p.m., the breach clock hit its final hour, quietly, invisibly, and irreversibly. 6 hours and 17 minutes. That was the official timestamp Novarisk's own server logs reported for when the unauthorized data exfil was finally detected, categorized, and flagged by someone on the back-end team. It was Brian, actually. Good old Brian, who once asked if a DDoS was a kind of Starbucks drink. He'd noticed something off in the logs, followed the breadcrumb trail for half an hour, and then finally filed an incident flag in the internal system. He marked the breach start time as 9:56 a.m. GMT. Problem was, their insurer's threshold wasn't interested in when he discovered it. They cared about when it started. That was the whole point of the clause. 6 hours from onset, and the only way to stay compliant and covered was for the named incident responder to activate the critical threshold clause via the underwriter's breach portal. That activation never happened, because the person who could do it had been escorted out of the building 2.5 days earlier. So when the insurer reviewed the logs, ran their own audit, and cross-checked the timeline, the verdict came down like a guillotine. Threshold not met. Breach escalation authorization not activated. Non-compliant territory engaged. Coverage status under review. Dalton did what Dalton always did. He panicked professionally, sent a dozen emails per minute, forwarded internal Slack logs, fired off a half-baked bullet point list titled Novarisk Incident Response Chronology Preliminary. In it, he claimed IT initiated mitigation protocols within the 6-hour timeline, and attached a screenshot of Brian logging into the monitoring dashboard at 2:03 p.m. The insurer's reply was 3 lines long. Mitigation protocol is not equivalent to policy activation. The named responder was not engaged. Clause 14B remains unmet. There was no wiggle room, no interpretation, no close enough logic. The insurance company operated by the book, and the book had my name in ink on page 14. Dalton tried the verbal route next. A call with their primary underwriter, Kara Langston, was scheduled for 5:45 p.m. She answered coolly, listened while Dalton explained how IT handled it, how protocols were executed, how our team operated with urgency and professionalism. When he finished, Kara asked a single question: who activated the threshold? Dalton, pausing only a second too long, answered, our lead technician. No, she said. Who activated the threshold clause? He stammered. Well, it wasn't, Lisa's no longer. I know she was terminated, she said with the flat, cutting patience of someone who'd already reviewed every file twice. What we're asking is, did anyone with proper designation execute the activation? I mean, not the named party, she repeated. 3 words. Clean. Final. Like a door closing with soundproof silence on the other side. Because even if Brian had hit every button, checked every port, and high-fived the firewall on his way out, it didn't matter. Legally, the insurer was bound by the designation. Operationally, Novarisk had failed to follow its own documented coverage requirements. No amount of handled it would change the timestamp. No emergency all hands or new Slack channel called me Hotfix 2025 could roll back the breach clock. At 6:17, the door slammed shut. 6 hours and 17 minutes. 17 minutes of arrogance. 17 minutes of skipping process for speed. 17 minutes that separated $22.4 million in coverage from zero. And the best part? Somewhere in legal, someone probably found the memo I sent 2 weeks before I was terminated. The one where I flagged the very clause Dalton shrugged off. The one where I wrote, Clause 14B, activation is individual dependent. Role replacement requires formal notice. Recommend immediate review before next incident cycle. I'd even attached a checklist. No one replied. They didn't break the system, they broke the clock, and they couldn't glue time back together. April 3rd, 10:22 a.m. Eastern, Novarisk's insurer sent the formal notice. Subject, claim denied, breach ref. 9:32, no legalese warm-up, no sympathetic preamble. Just the final blow, wrapped in company letterhead and cold precision. Projected liability, $22.4 million. Though I didn't hear it from Dalton, or anyone at Novarisk for that matter. I heard it first through back channels, an old contact in third-party risk compliance who forwarded the denial notice with no comment, just the emoji. But I already knew. The insurer's decision was a formality at that point. The timeline had collapsed. The clause hadn't been activated, and when the clock hit 6 hours and 17 minutes, the breach didn't just move into non-compliant territory. It went into policy no man's land. I opened the PDF. Coverage cannot be extended due to failure to activate escalation protocol within required time frame by named incident responder. Documentation submitted does not satisfy Clause 14B of the active policy. No approved substitution on file. Dalton, in what I can only assume was his last-ditch attempt to look in control, requested an emergency escalation call with the underwriters. He wanted to appeal, explain, reframe the facts like he always did, talk fast enough, throw enough buzzwords into the fire, and maybe, just maybe, someone on the other side would blink. But they didn't. They asked one question. Not 3, not 10. 1. Did you officially reassign the named responder per clause 14B? No spin, no jargon, no room to pivot, and Dalton, he froze, because he knew. He hadn't. He never filed the reassignment, never got legal to draft the transition form, never confirmed my off-boarding included credentialed replacement, never bothered to open the binder in the CEO's safe and see whose name was printed on the activation line. And now he couldn't undo it. Because coverage doesn't care about confidence, it cares about signatures. That evening, around 6:40 p.m., I got the text. Number I didn't recognize at first, just said, Hi Lisa, this is Amy from Legal. I understand this is out of the blue, but would you be open to consultation regarding the breach issue? They didn't even try to sweeten it. No apology, no offer upfront. Just the quiet desperation of someone trying to salvage a sunken ship with a teaspoon. I stared at the message for a while. Then I did something rare for me. I replied, No. That was it. No explanation. No scolding. No told you so. Because I didn't need to say it. They'd already read it, in the denial letter, in the clause they ignored, and in the silence that followed when the one person they thought was just IT held the only key to their recovery. I set the phone down, picked up a book, and poured a glass of wine. They could scramble all they wanted, but the damage was already done. And I wasn't their fixer anymore. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a conference room turned studio, wearing a blazer I hadn't touched since the last in-person audit back in 22. The backdrop behind me was matte gray, with the Echelon Cyber Risk logo backlit and subtle. Clean, corporate, boring, just how they liked it. There was a ring light in my face and a lav mic clipped awkwardly to my collar. Still, I felt oddly calm. The topic of the webinar was simple: why named parties matter. I'd been invited by the insurer's risk panel coordinator, Kara Langston, the same woman who'd once asked Dalton the question that detonated Novarisk's policy like a landmine. She knew what this was, and she wasn't subtle about it. "We'd love for you to share your experience with protocol integrity," she'd said in her email. "A lot of organizations still don't understand why a name in a policy isn't just a placeholder." No kidding. I opened with the basics. How most companies think incident response is just a function, like marketing or facilities. How they reduce cyber policy requirements to check boxes instead of understanding what named party really means. I explained the escalation clauses, the timing thresholds, the fact that insurers, despite all their complexity, care deeply, obsessively about precision. I could feel the audience leaning in. Some were CISOs, some were risk managers. A few were probably vendors hoping to get sound bites for their next white paper. And somewhere, sitting in a sleek chair with his teeth probably grinding down to dust, was Dalton. About 35 minutes in, I told a story. I kept it anonymized. No company names, no executive titles, just a case. There was a firm I'm familiar with, mid-market tech, healthy Series C funding, growing quickly. They had a solid breach policy, certified IR staff, named responder on file. All good, until someone in leadership decided to restructure, thought the policy was more symbolic than literal, fired the named responder without assigning a certified replacement. 3 weeks later, breach. They missed the activation window by 17 minutes. Claim denied, $22 million in liability. The chat lit up. First a few emojis, then, how often does that actually happen? Was that in Q1 or Q2? Who signed off on the policy lapse? And then, from someone listed as JMK Investor 42, wait, is this us? I didn't answer, didn't flinch, didn't even look at the chat. But I saw the panel coordinator's smile twitch. I kept going. Talked about operational drift, the illusion of redundancy, the way executives underestimate how fast 6 hours can pass when your systems are on fire and your responder can't be reached because she's been locked out of her email. A minute later, another line popped up in the attendees list. Dalton S. has left the webinar. I don't know if he walked out of the room, slammed a laptop close, or just rage quit from a hotel Wi-Fi, but he was gone. No goodbye message, no questions submitted. Just a blank space where his name had been. The rest of the panel continued smoothly. We wrapped on a Q&A about evolving breach clauses and the future of personal accountability in cyber policy structures. Someone asked if the industry was becoming too reliant on individuals. I smiled and said, only when they're the ones holding the map. After the session, 3 different companies reached out asking if I was available for the policy consulting. I declined the first 2. The third? Well, that one had already rewritten their clause to include 2 named responders and scheduled quarterly binder reviews. Smart move. Meanwhile, Novarisk still hadn't updated their press page, still hadn't disclosed the full cost of the breach. But the insurance world, they knew. And now, so did everyone else in that webinar. The brokers, the investors, the legal teams with ears perked up like dogs near a microwave. It wasn't about revenge. It was about visibility. I didn't leak anything. I just answered their questions and let the silence after each one say the rest. By early May, the board had finally stopped pretending it was a communications breakdown and started calling it what it really was. A procedural failure with a paper trail sharp enough to cut careers in half. An internal review was launched. Not a token one either. They pulled every memo, every meeting minute, every risk advisory dating back 12 months. Compliance folks from the London office got looped in. External counsel was hired, and someone, probably one of the old guard board members who still believed in reading, asked a dangerous question in the middle of a very expensive Zoom call. Did anyone warn him before he reassigned the role? They did. Twice. Two separate memos from risk management, both dated months before the breach, both cautioning that any change to the named incident responder required legal review and formal submission to the insurer. Both ending with variations of the same phrase. Non-compliance may jeopardize breach coverage eligibility. Dalton received them. He opened them. He even replied to one, scribbling, "Understood. Will loop legal when ready." He never did. Those memos were time-stamped, archived, digitally signed, immutable, ironclad. And when the board read them, really read them, there was no spinning left to do. Dalton didn't resign. He was transitioned out, quietly, no announcement. His LinkedIn went dark for a few weeks, then suddenly featured phrases like strategic pause and exploring new leadership opportunities. The usual digital incense burned to cover the smell of failure. The new CISO came from a defense background, someone who didn't treat cybersecurity like a shiny dashboard full of sliders, but like a battlefield with real stakes. First thing she did? She reinstated the incident response playbook I'd written, didn't tweak it. Didn't rebrand it, just put it back in place, sent out a company-wide memo titled Operational Continuity Protocols, effective immediately, and included a section that read, "Our current playbook reflects best practice standards and was authored by a prior IR lead whose documentation remains authoritative." They didn't name me. They didn't have to. A week later, someone from legal reached out again, this time not with desperation, but professionalism. They were rewriting the insurance policy from scratch. New carrier, new terms, dual response fallback, built-in legal review path, and a new line item buried in the appendix, foundational consultant, non-operational, with a small retainer attached and a simple clause. They wanted my signature, not to come back, not to rebuild what Dalton broke, just to acknowledge that the next structure was built on something I'd already written. I signed it, scanned, sent, filed, didn't ask for a spotlight, didn't want one. The breach never made major headlines. Too boring for tech blogs, too embarrassing for press releases. But in our industry, it traveled fast. A cautionary tale. I became the example. Don't do what they did with her. And that was enough. I didn't get revenge. I got the record. The audit trail didn't lie. And this time, I didn't have to raise my voice. I just let the paper speak. They never issued a statement. No press release. No company-wide email owning the mistake. That's not how Novarisk operated. Apologies implied admission. Admissions invited liability. So they stayed quiet. Just like they had during the breach. Just like they had when they erased my name from the org chart without checking where else it was printed. But their silence didn't mean nothing changed. Clause 14B, the one Dalton called a formality, got its own section in the new staff training slides. Not buried in fine print either. Bold font, red border. The slide title, Role-Based versus Named Coverage, Why It Matters. Someone added a bullet point that said, Insurance activation is not about titles. It's about documented individuals. Treat it like your legal team would treat a contract signature. Because that's exactly what it was. Dalton's replacement started a month after his exit. Her name was Meredith Kane, former military contractor, led cybersecurity initiatives for 2 federal compliance bodies. Her reputation was airtight, someone who didn't care about flash, only function. On her first day, she asked for the old IR documentation, the binder specifically. They had to explain that it was still locked in the CEO's office, sealed since October. She had the safe opened within an hour. That Friday, during her first staff meeting with risk, legal, and ops all present, she held up that same binder like a judge presenting evidence in court. She didn't make a speech. She just said, if we'd followed this, we wouldn't be in litigation. No one argued. They couldn't. Because inside that binder was the architecture I built, the drills I ran, the signatures they'd overlooked, the receipts they didn't shred. It wasn't just a record of what I'd done. It was a time-stamped testimony of everything they'd ignored while chasing optics over substance. I didn't hear that line live. I didn't need to. Someone forwarded the meeting recording. The email had no message, just a link. The subject line read, "Thought you'd appreciate the 1218 timestamp." I watched it once. Then I deleted it. Because the point wasn't to gloat. It was to finish the story. They called me just IT when they walked me out. But when it was over, when the breach was done bleeding, when the insurers had closed their file and the board had replaced half the executive team, they knew better. Everyone did. I wasn't just IT. I was the name on the policy, the name in the binder, the name they couldn't erase without erasing their coverage. That's how these things go if you're patient. The paper outlives the pitch decks. The quiet ones outlast the loud ones. And time stamps everything.